The wedding invitation sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I found the courage to open it. And when I finally did, my hands were shaking so badly that I tore the envelope instead of sliding it open cleanly. Inside was a cream-colored card with gold lettering, and there, printed for the entire world to see, was the name of the woman I had once promised to love until my last breath, minus Emma Whitfield. Soon to become Emma Carter, she was getting married again. And somehow, out of everyone she could have invited, she wanted me there. If this story stirs something in your heart before we even begin, if you believe that people can change, that broken things can still be beautiful, and that second chances are worth fighting for, I want you to hit that like button right now. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that love doesn't always end the way we expect it to. And subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story like this one. Now, let's go back to where it all began. My name is Daniel Reyes, and 8 years ago, I married the only woman I have ever truly loved. Emma and I met in college, in a cramped little library on the 3rd floor, where she was always tucked into the same corner seat, surrounded by textbooks and half-empty cups of coffee. I used to invent excuses to walk past her table just to catch a glimpse of her concentration, the way she chewed on the end of her pen when she was thinking hard, the way her eyes lit up whenever she solved a problem that had been frustrating her for hours. It took me 4 months to work up the nerve to speak to her, and when I finally did, I stumbled over my words so badly that she laughed at me before I even finished my sentence. That laugh became the sound I would chase for the next decade of my life. We fell in love the way young people do, recklessly and completely, believing that our love was somehow different from every love story that had come before us, immune to the mistakes and misunderstandings that unravel other couples. We got married 3 years after graduation in a small backyard ceremony with string lights and mismatched chairs, because neither of us cared about grandeur, only about each other. I remember standing at the altar, watching her walk toward me in a simple white dress, and thinking that I had never been more certain of anything in my entire life. I promised her that day that I would build a life worthy of her, that I would work hard to give her everything she deserved, and that no matter what came our way, I would always choose her first. But promises, I would come to learn, are easy to make and devastatingly easy to break. Not through some dramatic betrayal, but through 1,000 small absences that pile up until they become an unbridgeable distance. I threw myself into my career with a hunger that bordered on obsession, convinced that success was the greatest gift I could offer my wife. I told myself that the late nights at the office, the missed dinners, the canceled weekend trips, were all sacrifices made in the name of our future. I told myself that Emma understood, because she never complained loudly enough to make me stop and truly listen. What I failed to see, blinded by my own ambition, was that she was slowly disappearing into a loneliness I had created inside our own home. There was a night, about 4 years into our marriage, when Emma sat across from me at the dinner table, the food between us going cold, and told me quietly that she felt like she was living with a stranger who happened to share her last name. I remember feeling defensive rather than heartbroken, insisting that everything I did was for us, for the house we wanted, for the family we planned to have someday. She looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, not anger, but exhaustion, the kind that comes from trying to reach someone who has stopped reaching back. She asked me when was the last time I had truly looked at her, not glanced at her while scrolling through emails, but really looked at her, the way I used to in that library all those years ago. I didn't have an answer, and my silence told her everything she needed to know. The months that followed were a slow unraveling. We stopped fighting, which I mistakenly believed was a good sign, not realizing that the absence of conflict often means the absence of caring enough to fight for something. Emma began spending more time with her sister, staying out later, filling her calendar with things that didn't include me. I noticed, but I convinced myself it was temporary, a phase we would move past once my career stabilized, and I could finally give her the attention she deserved. I kept promising myself that tomorrow would be different, that next month would be different, that once this project ended or that promotion came through, I would become the husband she needed. Tomorrow never came in time. The day Emma told me she wanted a divorce, it was raining, the kind of relentless downpour that seems to mirror the collapse happening inside a person's chest. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. Not at first. She simply sat me down and told me, in the calmest voice I had ever heard from her, that she couldn't keep loving someone who treated her like a scheduled appointment, squeezed between more important matters. She said she still loved me, and that was somehow the most painful part, because if she had stopped loving me, I could have blamed the failure on something dying naturally. Instead, she was choosing to leave a love that was still alive, because staying was slowly killing her. I begged her to reconsider, promised I would change everything overnight, but she had heard those promises before, and she no longer believed them. She was right, not to. The divorce was finalized 11 months later, and I remember signing the papers with a hand that felt disconnected from my body, as though some other version of me was ending the most important relationship of his life, while the real me stood frozen, screaming silently for it to stop. Emma moved out of our house within weeks, taking only what mattered to her most, leaving behind furniture and photographs and fragments of a life we had built together. I stayed in that house for 2 more years, surrounded by rooms that echoed with her absence, unable to sell it because selling it felt like admitting that we were truly, permanently over. In the years that followed, I tried to rebuild myself into someone worth being. I went to therapy, something I had always dismissed before, and slowly began to understand the patterns I had inherited from my own father, a man who equated love with providing and never learned how to simply be present. I learned, painfully and gradually, that the people we love don't need us to build them empires. They need us to show up, to listen, to make them feel seen in the small, ordinary moments of everyday life. I became better at my job in ways that mattered, prioritizing balance instead of relentless ambition. But the truth is that all this growth felt hollow, because the person I most wanted to show my transformation to was no longer in my life to witness it. I heard through mutual friends, in fragments and half-updates, that Emma was doing well. She had started her own small design studio, something she had always dreamed of but never pursued while we were married, because I had unconsciously discouraged risks that didn't align with our 5-year financial plans. She had traveled to places she had once only pinned to a vision board. And eventually I heard she had met someone, a man named Marcus, an architect who apparently made her laugh the way she used to laugh at me in that library. Every piece of good news about her felt like both a blessing and a blade, because I wanted her happiness more than anything, even as it confirmed that I was no longer necessary to that happiness. When the wedding invitation arrived, my first instinct was to decline. I told myself that attending would be an act of self-torture, that watching her marry another man would undo years of healing in a single afternoon. But there was a small note tucked inside the envelope, written in her familiar handwriting, asking me personally to come, telling me that my presence would mean something to her, that despite everything, I had been an important chapter of her life, and she wanted me there as she began a new one. I sat with that note for a long time, turning it over in my hands before finally deciding that if she was brave enough to invite the man who once broke her heart into the happiest day of her life, the least I could do was be brave enough to attend. The wedding was held in a botanical garden an hour outside the city, surrounded by blooming magnolia trees and the soft hum of early summer. I arrived early, dressed in a gray suit I had bought specifically for the occasion, feeling like an intruder in a story that no longer belonged to me. Guests mingled under string lights, eerily similar to the ones from our own backyard wedding years earlier, and I wondered if she had chosen this detail on purpose, or if some memories simply refused to be erased no matter how much time passes. I found a seat near the back, wanting to observe without being seen, but Emma spotted me almost immediately, weaving through the crowd of well-wishers in a soft ivory dress that made my breath catch in my throat. She approached me with a warmth I hadn't expected, wrapping her arms around me in a hug that lasted just long enough to feel like closure, rather than reopening a wound. She thanked me for coming, told me I looked well, and asked how I had been, her eyes searching mine for something I couldn't quite name. We talked for a while near the edge of the garden, away from the noise of the gathering crowd, catching up on years of separate lives condensed into a few careful sentences. She told me about her studio, about the risks she had finally allowed herself to take, and I told her about the therapy, about the slow, humbling work of becoming someone better. Someone I hoped she would have been proud of had she stayed long enough to see it. It was during this conversation, as the sun began its slow descent behind the magnolia trees, that Emma asked me the question that would replay in my mind for months afterward. She asked, with a vulnerability that surprised us both, whether I would want to walk with her through our old memories one more time before she said her vows to someone else, a kind of farewell tour through the love we once shared, so that she could close that chapter completely and enter her new marriage without any lingering weight. She wasn't asking me to relive the relationship in a romantic sense. She was asking for something more sacred than that. A mutual acknowledgement that what we had once built together, however flawed and ultimately unsustainable, had been real and had mattered. Over the next hour before the ceremony began, we walked slowly along a path bordered by hydrangeas, and she spoke about the small moments that had stayed with her despite everything. The way I used to leave notes in her lunch bag during our early years together, the road trip where our car broke down, and we ended up dancing in a gas station parking lot to a song playing from a stranger's radio. The quiet mornings before my career consumed my attention when we would drink coffee together on our tiny apartment balcony and talk about nothing and everything at once. I hadn't realized how many of these fragments she had carried with her, treasured even through the pain of our ending, and hearing her recount them broke something open in my chest that I had kept carefully sealed for years. I told her, as honestly as I could manage, that I finally understood what I had failed to give her during our marriage, that I had spent so much energy trying to provide a future, that I forgot to be present in the moments that actually made up a life. I told her that I was genuinely happy for her, that Marcus was a lucky man, and that I hoped she would never again have to fight to be seen by someone who claimed to love her. She cried a little then, not from sadness, but from something gentler, a release of years of unspoken grief, finally finding its proper ending. She told me that this walk, this conversation, was the closure she needed, the chance to honor what we once had without letting it haunt what she was about to build. As the ceremony began and guests took their seats beneath an arch wrapped in white flowers, I found myself sitting quietly among strangers, watching the woman I once called my wife walk down the aisle toward a future that no longer included me, and instead of the devastation I had braced myself for, I felt something unexpected settle over me. A profound and peaceful gratitude. I was grateful that I had loved her, grateful that our story, despite its painful ending, had shaped me into someone capable of growth, and grateful that she had given me the gift of witnessing her happiness rather than leaving me to imagine it from a distance. Watching Marcus take her hands, watching the way he looked at her as though she were the only person in that entire garden, I understood that he was giving her something I never fully learned how to give, undivided presence, and I was at peace knowing she had finally found it. If this story has touched something inside you, if you've ever loved someone and lost them only to find unexpected peace on the other side of that loss, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who might need this story today. Your support means more than you know, and it helps this channel keep telling stories that matter. Before we close this chapter together, I want to ask you something important. In the comments below, I want you to write the words second chances. If you believe, as I do now, that love doesn't always have to end in bitterness, that sometimes the most healing thing we can do is release someone with grace instead of resentment. In the months since that wedding, Emma and I have remained gentle acquaintances, exchanging occasional messages, celebrating each other's milestones from a respectful distance. I still think about that walk through the hydrangeas sometimes, about the way closure can look nothing like what we expect, and everything like what we actually need. I learned in the end that reliving our memories wasn't about reopening old wounds or rekindling a love that had already served its purpose. It was about honoring the truth that once, two young people in a library loved each other with everything they had, and even though that love couldn't survive the mistakes I made, it deserved to be remembered with tenderness rather than regret. If you take one thing away from this story, let it be this: love people fully while you have the chance. Be present in the small moments before life sweeps them away. And if you ever find yourself standing at the end of a love story, choose grace over grief. Because sometimes the most beautiful ending isn't getting back what you lost, but finally learning to let it go with love intact. Wayne